Hello and welcome back to Pet Square's A Geek's Guide to the Beach Boys. I'm your host, Adam Marsland, and this is part 4 of our 7-part look at what is widely regarded as the Beach Boys' greatest achievement, the album Pet Sounds. We are going to be delving into the song-by-song analysis that is the hallmark of many of the shows of this series. Before we get into that, just a couple of bits of business. The first being, this is my second episode of this series that I'm doing just post recovering from COVID. So if I sound a little hoarse or I look a little disheveled, that's why. So I hope you will cut me a little bit of slack. The second thing I want to mention is haven't talked about this lately, but this channel does have a Patreon, and we do also do the same thing with PayPal. It's not something where there's tons and tons and tons of bonus content, but there are 3 bonus episodes of this series. There's a bonus episode of the other series, Adam Walks Around, and then there's some music-related content. I live in Southeast Asia, so $1 goes where $3 goes in the United States, so it really enables me to put the time into this show. So if you feel like contributing in some way, just check the first comment below. Otherwise, do not feel any obligation. I'm happy to have you here. Of course, liking and subscribing and hitting the notification bell, all those hallmarks of YouTube fandom, those do help the show as well. The third thing I want to say is, as always, when we get into the track-by-track session and recording analysis of this, I'm deeply indebted to the main consultant on the show, Craig Slowinski, who is basically the world's authority on Beach Boys sessions. He gives me free access to his research, and it's basically the cutting edge of what is known about this stuff historically. And I want to acknowledge the work of his research team. It's a conglomeration of a lot of Beach Boys fans and archivists and historians and people of that ilk, but the main 3 are John Brode, who's very well known in the Beach Boys community, as are Will Crerar and Jocelyn Hoisington. Nearly all of the music credit information comes from them. On very, very rare occasions, I will have something to contribute or quibble with. Doesn't happen very often, but once in a while I'll have something to add, and when that is the case, I will flag it as such, so you'll know where the information is coming from. And I think that gets us up to where we need to be, so let's start right in with our track-by-track analysis of Pet Sounds. So, side 1, track 1, Wouldn't It Be Nice? When I was talking about The Little Girl I Once Knew, the band's fall 1965 single, I said it was in the running for the greatest single the Beach Boys ever did, and there's a lot of stiff competition for that. I did say at that point that wasn't my choice, but if you want to know what my choice for the Beach Boys' greatest single of all time is, this is it. Wouldn't It Be Nice? Now, this is my personal opinion. If you want to argue that it's Little Girl I Once Knew or California Girls or Good Vibrations or even Don't Worry Baby, you'll get no argument from me. They're all amazing songs, but for me, this has every possible thing that you could want from the Beach Boys. With Wouldn't It Be Nice, we are fully into the Pet Sounds sound. It is part of the album. It's not nearly Pet Sounds. It is Pet Sounds, but at the same time, it's very accessible. You still have a teenage or young adult point of view, so it still has one foot in the innocent outlook of the Beach Boys' earlier material. So it's still accessible to a fan of what the band did prior to Pet Sounds, but it has everything that Pet Sounds has. It has the band at the absolute peak vocal form. As we'll discuss, Brian was particularly painstaking recording the vocals for this track. It has an inventive and compelling instrumental backing track. The lyrics, while they are a little juvenile, there is a lot of hidden depth. I think when you listen to this track, the overwhelming sense of the song is one of yearning. Everything about it, the lyrics quite literally, but also the flow of the backing vocals and the movement of them and their perfection, along with a track that just has great rhythm to it. I mean, the first thing here is, power snare, right? First thing you hear when the band comes in. I mean, but you have a backing track that's anchored by accordions, which is possibly the most sentimental sound you could conjure up, right? You think of an accordion in an Italian restaurant. So accordions used in a way that they hadn't previously been used, and these interlocking guitar parts that conjure up childhood. There's a yearning that goes both ways, because there's the yearning of the young to be old enough to achieve their dreams. But there's the yearning of us looking back on our youth and the sort of naivete of that outlook. And also the way the track is put together, you can get lost in it like a dream, but a dream is something that you can't quite capture, is it? Right? So when you have a dream, you see this world that is real to you in the moment, but is ephemeral. You can't really grasp it. So you've got that, and then there's an added layer of poignancy that I think no one intended at the time. Is this song was cut in 1966, which was a point in music history and in Western history where everything was on the cusp of change. And there was an excitement of new possibilities and where things might go, breaking out of the sort of black and white cultural zeitgeist of the 50s and early 60s into the more technicolor vibe that the Beatles had ushered in with the British invasion. Now, what was going to happen next? And with a lot of the music from 66 into early 67, you have this sense of renewed hope and possibility. And when we move into the later 60s and how the flower power movement worked out in reality, the rot starts to set in. And the Pet Sounds album, interestingly, if you want to argue for it as a concept album, there's a very clear progression. Maybe not a narrative, but there's a progression that starts here with kids wishing that they were in a relationship and or can grow up and be married and have sleepovers. Excuse me. And you wind up with Caroline No, where you have this sense of people having changed from their childhood and coming to the other side of that transition, and things aren't that great. There's a progression from innocence wishing to lose its innocence to lost innocence and going, well, that wasn't such a great idea, was it? And both the song, intentionally lyrically, and with the vibe it conjures up, and with its place in music history, that all dovetails to make a beautiful pop single that functions as a childhood love story, but also to get at those places in time in our lives where things seemed most possible, and we were looking forward with enthusiasm and excitement before it all was realized in some way that often would take us somewhere that we didn't expect and wasn't quite as nice and rosy as we thought. And that is the function of the song on the album. I think that's what makes it so beautiful. This is my pick for the greatest Beach Boys single of all time. And if you want me to walk through why I didn't pick all the other ones, I can. Maybe I'll make a bonus episode of that or whatever. And if you want, put your pick in the comments because I'm interested to hear. I won't argue any of them unless it's yeah, anyway. Wouldn't It Be Nice was released on July 18th, 1966, rather belatedly in my opinion. The B-side was God Only Knows, and I just want to do a quick addendum to my criticism of Capitol Records for not holding God Only Knows back as freestanding A-side. Apparently the issue here was just the word God in the song title just freaked mid-60s middle America out. And Capitol suspected that they couldn't get away with it. I've seen some sources that say that God Only Knows was the original A-side, and then they just got so much pushback that they went to Wouldn't It Be Nice. I couldn't verify that. It may or may not be true, but I think that in general, my criticism of Capitol for that probably was misplaced. I think in that case, Capitol probably read the marketplace correctly. I don't think God Only Knows, because of the title, could have achieved the same success it did worldwide just because of the basic conservatism of large parts of the American market. It still did get to number 38 as a B-side, so it's pretty good stuff. But anyway, Wouldn't It Be Nice went to number 8 on the Billboard chart. It actually did better on the 2 other charts that were operating then, Record World and Cashbox, and actually that would be a trend through the late 60s, and that's something I'll talk about when we get into the late 60s albums, the difference in the chart placements. It did quite well in some other countries. It was number 2 in Australia, number 4 in Canada. In the UK was the one place it wasn't released until much later. It went to number 58 in 1990 when it was released, apparently in conjunction with the Pet Sounds CD release. But somehow it achieved gold certification, which is, I think, 600,000 units in the UK. I don't understand how that happened if it only went to number 58. Maybe if you're an expert on things, you can put that in the comments as well. With the stereo version of this, you really can hear much better how great the vocals are, but it does lose some impact, and you have some weird phasing in and out because of what went on with Mike Love's vocal, and I'll discuss that in a minute. Credits on this song, of course, it's 100% Wrecking Crew, the elite group of studio musicians that were ubiquitous on mid-60s Los Angeles sessions and the backbone of the Pet Sounds sound. They are as follows: 12-string electric lead guitar, Barney Kessel likely playing a Dan Electro Bellzouki, modified 12-string, and Jerry Cole. Bill Pittman on acoustic rhythm guitar, Carol Kay, electric bass, 6-string electric bass, Dan Electro, Ray Pullman. Lyle Ritz played the upright bass, Al DeLore on grand piano, tech piano, Larry Knechtel, Hal Blaine on drums, Frank Capp on percussion, namely tambourine, timpanis, and glockenspiel. The dual accordion attack was fronted by Carl Fortina and Frank Morocco. Roy Caton played trumpet, the saxes, Steve Douglas and Plas Johnson, rounded out by Jay Migliore on baritone sax. All 6 Beach Boys appear on this track. The lead vocal is taken by Brian Wilson with Mike Love on the bridge. Mike's vocal is from an earlier take. Brian decided he wanted to sing it himself and wiped Mike's vocal, and then later reconsidered and edited in Mike's earlier vocal from a prior mix of the song. This created havoc for future compilers of Beach Boys hits and of this album. The only true stereo version could be made from Brian's version, so on the stereo version of Wouldn't It Be Nice, at least on the early releases, you'd have this weird phasing thing where they put Mike's version in, and then it would kind of go to mono, and then kind of go back out, and go back in, and go back out. It was done pretty well, but you can hear it with headphones. It's kind of weird. This also means that there are versions floating around on compilations. I think Made in the USA might have had this, where Brian's lead vocal is featured on the bridge. It kind of got loosey-goosey for a while. I think all the versions released now have Mike's vocal. They've overcome the technical problems from how Brian did the track. Dennis is on this track with the other Beach Boys, and he cupped his hands to sing his parts, and I'm a little unclear which parts they are. They're apparently bass parts in the verse, and it was to achieve a certain effect like this, I guess, and it worked out pretty well. Brian and Dennis were both pretty happy with it. Tony Asher originally tried to write this side by side with Brian at the piano and found that there wasn't a really good flow to that. And so Tony finally said, look, let me take this home and work with it, and that's how this song was written. The basic track for Wouldn't It Be Nice was cut on January 22nd. It was one of, if not the first, songs cut for the main body of the album. There were a few things cut prior to that in '65. So as I said when we talked in the overview of the album previously, the Pet Sounds concept started out as an album about childhood, and it was suggested on a Beach Boys message board because I was mildly, not critical, but sort of puncturing some of the mythology about Brian spending 1965 just thinking up sounds for the album. And I was saying, well, that's not really making an album, that's thinking about making an album. And someone on a message board said, well, Brian might have been coming up with bits and pieces that he used on the album. And I was a little dismissive of this suggestion. And I thought about it later when I listened to this album. And I think that the commenter might have a point. And I apologize if you're watching this, you probably are. Because as I've listened to this, there are bits and pieces of these songs that do sound sort of childlike, and they might have been parts of songs that Brian had come up with during '65 when he was still thinking about this return to innocence concept. And the intro to this song, I think, would be one of those things which does sound very kind of da 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 da. We're going to the playground, right? It's kind of interesting because we have this concept of innocence and this in a bit of a kind of naive variety, but yet, as we discussed earlier, one of the inspirations for the song was certainly Brian's infatuation with his wife's sister, Diane. And there's a little bit of a less than innocent motivation in Brian's thinking for wanting to talk about the subject. But, you know, whether you're a teenager wishing you could have a sleepover with your girlfriend or a guy wishing you could have a sleepover with your wife's sister, I guess you do wind up in about the same place. But it's, you know, you can look at the song any way you want to. I mean, that's what's great about music. Brian claims that he started the intro just fooling around on a honky-tonk piano, and when you think about how he achieved this with the 12-string guitar by Barney Castle, which, as I said, may have been something called a Dan Electro Bellzouki, which is a sort of I'm not really sure what it is, but I'm going to research a little and I'll put it up there.
Based on a design by session guitarist Vinnie Bell to use on dates where he was asked to double on an 8-stringed Greek folk instrument called a bouzouki, Bell convinced the Dan Electro Company to create an electric 12-string guitar with a bouzouki-shaped body, a Bellzouki.
But whatever it was, he sure had a devil of a time keeping it in tune. The lower part, incidentally, was played by Jerry Cole, and actually I got to recreate this recording with him in a very special session that I'll talk about when we get to Sloop John B. But he did the lower interlocking part. And what's interesting about the intro is that it's in an implied key of A, major, and then as soon as the drum comes in, we drop into F. Now, the relative minor key to A is F sharp minor, so it sort of feels natural because you're going down a half step if you're thinking about the relative minor, but it is a fairly radical move. And then we get into the bridge, which is a different key entirely. You actually have the same part, which is overlaid a different set of chords. And now is a good time for me to switch into musician mode and do a breakdown of the intro. So the opening to Wouldn't It Be Nice is another in a long series of Brian Wilson guitar figures that are pretty much impossible to play because they were conceived on a keyboard. They're particularly difficult for me because I have huge sausage fingers, and my fingers are actually bigger than the frets up where this is played, which is on the 14th fret. So I'll give it my best shot because this is how it is on the record. So that was fun, wasn't it? And there's a second guitar part that interlocks with it that is a lot easier to play. It goes like this. So that's how that goes. And I just talked about how difficult this figure is to play. I mean, I've been working on it for 30 years and I get it about half the time. Various people, even Carl dumbed it down. If you listen to the way he does it, it's like, so which is a lot easier. He's using the E form. So even the Beach Boys, even Carl, as obsessive as he was about getting parts right, he kind of dumbed this part down a little bit, and we'll see that with some of the other guitar and bass parts from Pet Sounds. And you can't really blame them because you know, they were trying to play stuff that even seasoned session musicians sometimes struggled with because these were just not intuitive parts. So I told you before in a prior episode that I was there at the Capitol Tower when they were working on the DVD that went with the Beach Boys 30th anniversary package, and I went in with Alan Boyd and Al Jardine. So after Al's interview was over, for some reason, the three of us were together, and Al started raving about the bridge from Wouldn't It Be Nice? And he asked Alan and me if we remembered the chord sequence from it. And actually, we both knew it, but we both forgot it. So the three of us, me, Alan Boyd, and Al Jardine, ran off into one of the other studios in the basement of Capitol, and we all sat around a piano working out the chords from the bridge to Wouldn't It Be Nice, which is a pretty cool memory, actually. So what made the bridge to Wouldn't It Be Nice so amazing that we all had to run off to Capitol Studios A or B or whatever it was and look at the piano? Well, let's go to the chords themselves. It's basically got 4 chords to it. You've got D major 7, G major 7, F sharp minor 7, B minor 7. Okay, just 4 chords. So what makes this genius is this is basically 4 chords constructed out of 2 basic triads, the B minor triad and the F sharp minor triad. Okay? So if you add a D to an F sharp minor triad, you now have a D major 7. If you add a G to a B minor triad, you now have a G major 7. Likewise, as we go to the second part, we now have the F sharp minor triad we just talked about, but now we add a 7, and we go to the B minor triad and we add a 7 there. And so what we've got is 2 internally consistent chord patterns, because it's 1 4 1 4, 1 major 7, 4 major 7, 1 minor 7, 4 major 7. Makes logical sense, right? But they're both configured around the same core 2 triads, the B minor and the F sharp minor. So all we've done is we've changed the roots around, and we've asserted these particular 4-note chord configurations. So now I'm going to take my hand off and not play any of the extra notes, and we've got the same 2 chords. But so we've used the same triads, but we've gotten tricky with the roots and we've split them into 2 internally consistent chord patterns. So it feels like it's the same chords, but it's not. It's really, really awesome. Now what's kind of cool about the bridge, and the way I talked about how he uses chord progressions that are different but built around the same root triads. So it's 4 chords built around 2 chords. So what he does is when it goes to that, he's able to take the intro figure and put it all the way over the bridge, even though the chords change under it. He plays it down here. Pick your poison if you're going to be the guitar player at a Beach Boys band, whether you want to sing lead or backup. Here's how the lead would go playing this figure. Maybe if we think and wish and hope and pray it might come true. Lots of fun there. Or you get to do Run, Run, Ryu. Yeah, so the Pet Sounds stuff, really hard to play. And you think about what the guys had to deal with. They have to contend with playing this part and singing either, Mike would have been singing that part. So you got, I guess it was Carl, he would have been Run, Run, Ryu, something like that. I don't actually remember what his part is, but this put them in a really tough spot. So once Hal Blaine brings us in with a crash and we're in the main part of the song, as I said earlier, the main bed of this song is these 2 accordions that are being played in unison, interacting with the reverb to create this patina of the track. And we'll see this again and again on Pet Sounds. You've got the reverb of the room that's interacting with the root instrument or whatever the instrument that's sort of carrying the main chordal sequence of the song. And in this case, it's mostly accordions. And this is, as I said, this creates a very unique kind of glow and mood that interacts with the vocals to have this sort of breezy flow and this slightly sad but very beautiful kind of walking on a summer Sunday, a beautiful day that you'll never quite get back, give you that kind of vibe to it. And Brian was very proud of the idea of using the accordions, and he said, I had two accordion players playing at once, both playing the same thing, and it just rang through the room in the booth, and everyone was saying, what is that sound? And you can imagine how that would have gone down. And the way Brian did this was really exhausting to the accordion players, because when you get to the bridge, he has them play with something called a triple bellow shake technique. And I'm not an accordion player, so I actually went to the Liberty Bellows YouTube channel, which is an accordion instruction channel, to learn about the triple bellow shake. And what this is you play the accordion, you're basically pushing in the bellows, the air part of the accordion, to create the sound, right? And then you're fingering chords with your one hand, and you are fingering on the keyboard with the other, and then you're pushing the accordion in and out. So it's a very physical thing to do. So the triple bellows is to basically move the bellows in and out, so that you have a triple sounding of the accordion within one beat. So you're doing this very fast bellow thing, going in, out, in, all within one beat. And so you're basically shaking the accordion to make it sound 3 times within a beat, which, recorded the way it is, makes it sound like a string section. But it's very hard to do, because you can imagine, it seems the more we, you're the accordion player going like this. And I've talked about this before, that these are elite players, and they're very, very good at what they do, but they are human beings, and they are being asked often to play outside of their comfort zone, and this exhausted the accordion players. But he got the effect he wanted. It's one of the reasons the bridge is so incredible. And another reason the bridge is so incredible, another reason the song is so incredible, is the vocals. This is one of the hardest sessions the Beach Boys ever had vocally. Brian had them do this over and over and over again. He just wanted everything perfect, the resonance of it, the mood of it, particularly the rhythm. It's something they had a lot of trouble with. Carl even said years later he thought they still rushed it a little bit. I don't think so, but he had them do it over and over, and the band recalls this quite vividly. Mike once said, like, who's going to hear this, The Ears of a Dog, which some say is the reason we came up with the Pet Sounds title. That might be apocryphal, but anyway, there's no question, if you break these down, the vocals are outstanding. And when I was working on that session I referred to, where I recorded with Jerry Cole and some of the Wrecking Crew guys, I was tasked with doing the initial vocal arrangement, breaking everything down. I remember getting the vocals only version of Pet Sounds and working out the vocals on Wouldn't It Be Nice, and getting to the bridge, and I was astounded. I don't want to be blasphemous, but it was like seeing God. It was like working out some Einsteinian equation, because once I figured out what each note was doing, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. What Brian was doing on the bridge was keeping, I can't remember if it was 6 or 7 parts, but he kept them all moving without ever having notes duplicate. So there was never an octave, like this guy's singing an A and down here, and this guy's singing an A up here, or whatever. So he kept these 6 parts moving in kind of stair-step patterns, having people moving in different places, so no one ever sat on the same notes. 6 or 7 parts. This is impossible, basically. And yet I saw how he did it, looking at, how, it was like working out a puzzle, right? And I was like looking at it going, my God, this is why they call him a genius. This is astounding. Like, I wouldn't have thought of this in a million years. It was just, and you could see how much deliberate thought had to go into that arrangement to get it to work out that way. And I wish I still had that transcription so I could show it to you, but I'm sure someone else has done it and reached the same conclusion. But I was just, it was one of the most stunning things that I've ever worked out in pop music. I'm sure there's things in classical and jazz that are way cooler than that. I'm not claiming anything different, but I was simply amazed at the arrangement there. And it's just one section of one song of this album, and it's indicative of the level of care and thought and planning that Brian put into making what he hoped would be the greatest pop rock album of all time. So, as always on Pet Sounds, another thing that made this song really distinctive was the bass. Brian, as I've said before, pioneered the use of unusual roots in chords in pop music, using the 5 and the 3 and sometimes the 2 and other crazy things, instead of the standard 1 in the root, which most pop music functions on. You know, if you play a G on the guitar, the bass player is playing a G. He's not playing a B or something like that, right? So in this song, also like many of the songs, it's got a very active bass line. Basically, the way a lot of things go in Pet Sounds is if the chord structure of the song is relatively simple, which this is, I'm not saying it's simple, but relative to some of the stuff we're going to analyze later, the bass would tend to be a bit busier. And if the chord progressions were pretty deep, pretty thick, pretty intricate, Brian would kind of leave the bass alone and let it be fairly simple, just to not confuse things any further. This is one of the ones where the bass gets kind of busy, and in fact, Brian actually notated this song for the bassist in the session in a different key than the rest of the crew. And this created some consternation when Lyle Ritz, who sort of went to Brian and said, "What's going on here?" And Brian's like, "It's going to work, trust me." This was recreated in the movie Love and Mercy. In that film, it was Carol Kay who did the complaint. And actually, funny aside, the person that played Carol Kay was a real bass player. Her name was Teresa Cowles. And at the time of the filming, and for many years, she actually was the bass player in my band. And I actually was helping her prep for this, because she actually really played the bass, as did all the actors in that film. They actually were really playing their instruments. So I was going over some of these songs with Teresa just to make sure everything was, all the notes were exactly right. She actually expressed a little trepidation having to do a line reading because she wasn't an actress. And she told me she had to say this line like, "Well, it's 2 keys, how's this going to work?" And she's supposed to be a little talking back to Brian, and she didn't know how to play it. And I said, "Just play it exactly like when we're in rehearsal and I'm doing something you think is messed up." And that's exactly what she did. That's what you see in the film. So I always love that scene, because I see Teresa just giving me the stink eye when I'm asking her to do something crazy. And actually, I've always been blessed to have great bass players like Teresa, so that I didn't have to do the hard work of picking up the bass, but I'm all by myself now. So you're stuck with me as we do an analysis, as we will with a lot of these tracks, of the bass line in Wouldn't It Be Nice. Wouldn't It Be Nice is one of the simpler songs on Pet Sounds, which is not to say it's simple. There's some really interesting parts in it that we're going to talk about, especially on the bridge. So basically, for the verse, is pretty simple, as I said. You've got, it's in the key of F. You've got the 1, F major, the 4, B flat major, the relative minor to that, the 2 minor, which is G minor 7, and then I think C7 gets us back to the 1. So that's a pretty basic progression. So if you were playing that on the bass and just playing the roots, nothing to it, right? So, and the track is pretty much set around those 8th notes on the accordion, or triplets, I'm sorry. They're doing that, right? And the drums and percussion, pretty straight, dum, 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 da dum. Okay, so all the movement is on the bass, because instead of doing this, he's going like this. Then we get to that the pre-chorus, which is really interesting. That's, I believe, a D minor 7 over A, very unusual chord, then E flat over F. And the rhythm breaks, so the bass is kind of gets a little swingier, so it's going.
kind of swinging around. Then we get back to the verse, doing all that stuff again. And so then we get to the bridge. I got the rhythm run right there. But that's how specific this music is. Because I know if I get even one thing wrong, Darian or somebody's going to call me. But that's basically it, what I just did, okay? So then we get to the breakdown where everything kind of slows down and everything kind of padding behind it, and the whole counter melody is on the bass, and it's got this crazy lead bass thing with all these arpeggios. Arpeggios are basically when you articulate each individual note of a chord like this. That's an arpeggio, right? It's a lead bass line. The only thing moving, and the most prominent thing moving, is the bass line. Arpeggio. 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 Oh, wouldn't it be nice? Incidentally, if you are Brian Wilson in a Beach Boys tribute band, this is what you got to do. First of all, you're singing over this chord. When you're playing this root, it sounds like you're singing that, but you're singing over this. You know it seems the more. So it's like this. You know it seems the more we talk about it, it only makes it worse to live without it. Good luck with that.
So after we go through all the background elements, we are left with the lead vocal, which was performed by Brian Wilson, and it is one of the more challenging lead vocals to do in the Beach Boys recorded oeuvre. Brian starts it out in an A, and most male voices, the normal range tops out at about an F or maybe a G. There's not a lot of people that can do a full voice A, so you're talking about someone like Steve Perry. I mean, it's not like nobody can do it, but you have to be a pretty good singer to do a full voice A. I cannot, actually. But Brian had a very strong head voice. So even though it would be head voice, I don't want to get too far into vocal technical stuff. Broadly speaking, head voice is this sort of mixed voice between falsetto and full voice that allows you to hit these upper register notes without sounding like a wimp. And Brian had a very strong head voice. And so he was able to go, whoop, and not have it sound real wimpy. Now, I'm a little post-COVID, so it was a little rough. But the funny thing for this is most people have trouble with that first note, and I've always had trouble with the bottom note. So I can go, wouldn't it be bleh, because you're going through so many parts of your voice. Wouldn't it be? And then you're going, nice, right? So it's so even if you've got that top note, now you're going through the trap door into the bottom part. No matter where your voice lies, this is tough. And there's an interesting outtake on the live rehearsals from 1967 when Brian joined them to do a show in Hawaii. And you can hear him trying to sing it, and he has the same amount of trouble that I would have or anybody else would have doing this song without a certain amount of preparation. And then you hear Carl go, yeah, Al's been doing it live. And then pretty soon Al's doing it, even though Brian's right there. Which shows you, even for Brian, this was at his peak, this was a tough song to sing, and he probably was coming in without having sung a lot. So again, it's the same kind of thing where for a song like this, you kind of got to be warmed up. But there's an interesting history of this song being done live because Al sang it, often doubled by someone else. And like I said, they would double the lead vocal on this a lot for the exact same reason I just said. For any singer, no matter how much, because the melody just goes between this upper tenor register back into a lower register and back up, and it's a very tough melody to get all those crossovers right. So they would double a lot of the parts. And Al was the main guy until the 80s. And Al, while he's maintained most of his voice, his upper register kind of fell off in the 80s at some point. You can hear it when he goes for some notes on the Beach Boys 85. The falsetto that he had earlier that he used to double Brian kind of got less reliable. So Carl wound up singing it after that, and then after Carl passed, it would fall to somebody in the backup band. But I was told, and I don't remember who told me the story, Carl was very rigorous about doing vocal exercises, and before every show he would warm up thoroughly. And supposedly at one point Al came up to him, this would probably be the late 80s, and asked Carl why he did that, and Carl just responded, "Wouldn't it be nice?" Meaning that Carl could still sing it and Al had difficulty with it. In terms of Brian doing it, Brian tried it a few times with the band, even at times when he wasn't vocally all there. And I think, again, that has to do with the unique quality of his voice on this. And even in later days when his voice was a little less reliable, he still had that kind of high, whiny sound to his voice. And in some ways in the 80s, he probably could punch that A better than he did in the 60s, even if he couldn't get all the other kind of notes. So there's a lot of instances of, not a lot, but there's various instances of him trying to sing this from his return in the band in 76 up to about 1991. There's a really comical kind of 76, 77 era live thing where Brian's playing bass and he goes up and he tries very enthusiastically to sing the vocal, and he's in just another, it's not even another key, it's another planet, and you see Al just kind of going, oh crap, I got to dive in here. And then there's some others where he's kind of in and out. But the best Brian performance of the song live to me is Live Aid, where he's there and his mic is on, but he's being doubled by Al, and I believe also Jeff Foskett. So they're kind of keeping the melody on the rails, but you can hear Brian kind of poking out, and so his tonality's there. And so it's sort of the best of both worlds. You get Brian in there and the sound of Brian and that voice, but the other guy's kind of doubling him, kind of keep the melody in the right range. And I really like the Live Aid version of this song. And another thing about this song being done live that's interesting is up until 1971, they dropped the legato, the place where it slows down, they dropped that part entirely. In 71, they really revamped their live show, I think, at Jack Riley's and Carl Wilson's instigation, Jack Riley being their manager at the time. And they really started to explore how they could do the material from this period in a less perfunctory way and really grasp the possibilities of it. This was at the time that they finally evolved an effective version of Heroes and Villains. And so instead of just sort of shining this whole problem of the tempo slowing down, they leaned into it and they slowed it way further down. And if you listen to the version of it in concert, which came out in 1973, you hear them just slowing it down. And it is a spine-chilling moment because the crowd loses it. Listen to it on YouTube, it's great. There was another live version done of this song just prior to them changing the arrangement, and it's when the Beach Boys appeared at the Big Sur Folk Festival in 1970. That was the beginning of their détente with the counterculture. And that's a pretty good performance, but again, it's got the old arrangement, so it skips the song slowing down, and also Dennis isn't on it, but it is a bit of a curiosity. It was on the Ode label, so it was on a different label, so it's a Beach Boys single that's mostly forgotten, the live version of Wouldn't It Be Nice from 1970. One thing I want to delve into with this song is the writing credits. The song is credited to Brian Wilson, Tony Asher, and Mike Love, and this is one of many songs where Mike Love received retroactive credit for songwriting as a result of a lawsuit that was resolved in the early 90s. And this was very controversial because a lot of people felt that Mike was overreaching and overstating his contributions to these songs. By Mike's own admission, in a lot of these cases, what he would do with the songs is Brian would bring him ideas that were fairly fleshed out, and Mike would make changes that might amount to a small percentage of the song, but had a key role in what he perceived to be the song's commercial potential. And as we've started to get away from the sort of villainization of Mike Love, I mean, in some quarters it's alive and well, but as we've started to look at Mike's claims more fairly, a lot of what he says is true. There's a question about how much it's true, how significant his contributions were, but those contributions were made, and they did, in many cases, improve what Brian came in with. One of the big examples is I Get Around, where Mike came up with round, round, get it around, I get around. He came up with a whole intro idea, told Brian to not do a whole music intro thing, and he also tightened up some of Brian's lyrics that weren't working. And, you know, Mike probably wrote 10% of I Get Around, but it was a pretty key 10%. So I think I've been pretty fair to Mike in this show in general, and I'm not an apologist, but I also want to give full credit to what he's actually done, and not fall into this trap of blaming one member of the band or another. Band politics are complicated, people are complicated. We're also talking about people that exist in different times and different circumstances. Band members' contribution in one part of the band's history, a band member's behavior in one part of the band's history might be very different from another. So in general, I'm pretty supportive of Mike's claims, particularly as other collaborators with Brian have said kind of the same things, that they brought stuff to the table and they would kind of get hand-waved away by Brian and Murray. You know, they did more than they were credited for. However, I disagree with Mike's credit on this song. I don't usually take strong positions like this. This particular credit annoys me as a songwriter. I once had a band where there was somebody in the band that wanted more songwriting input, and it was a little bit like he wanted a Mike Love kind of arrangement, where I would bring the song in nearly finished and he would kind of toy with it and then get 50%. And I didn't like that, because I worked very, very hard on my songs, and it was a lot of sweat and blood, and to get them where I wanted. And I said, I don't have any problem writing with you, but I would prefer you to be right there with me doing it and helping me with the hard work of figuring out what to do with this, instead of coming after I've done all the work and changing a couple of things and saying I co-wrote the song. So I'm a little personally biased on this issue. Mike's contribution seems to have been a minor vocal arrangement change and the Good Night, Sleep Tight descant at the end, which is basically a nursery rhyme or a saying, childhood saying. It's insignificant, and I don't think really improves the song. I think it dumbs it down a bit. And also, if I was in the room and I was part of the band and I offered that up, I would just consider that being part of the team. I mean, as a producer, I've done things that I could consider songwriting many, many times. And I was just trying to, do my job of, if we move this to here, we move this to there, it can be better, and thanks for my check for the session, that's all I need. And I'm older, so I come from the school that doesn't say you need 12 songwriters on a song. I realize things have changed now, and every last person has to get credit for every last thing they did on a record. And I come from a different mentality and time period. But just as a guy that sweated out dozens of songs on his own, when someone gets a songwriting credit, I want to see it be more than this, And I think Tony Asher is every right to be annoyed that Mike got credited on this, especially as some of his lyrics, as many as this, at least 6 words, that he did for Good Vibrations wound up getting used, for which Mike Love got sole credit. So, if Mike gets on Wouldn't It Be Nice, Tony Asher surely should be on Good Vibrations. Tony didn't make that case. So again, I want to make clear, I'm not a Mike hater, and I think the anger towards Mike's obsession with his denial of songwriting credit, there's a lot of context to that tends to get overlooked. But when people, the other side of that is when people sort of criticize Mike for overreaching, his credit on this song is one of those examples. And I don't have a problem with the rest of the stuff, but I don't like this. So I'm just saying that for my own personal opinion, and I just told you why. Anyway, the only other thing I have to say about Wouldn't It Be Nice, and we've been talking about it for a couple hours, I think now, is that Wikipedia credits it with starting progressive pop, the idea of a progressive pop song. I think a lot of Brian's songs, with their complexity melded with the pop hook and the concision of them, you could make that argument with I Get Around as well, but I love progressive pop. If we're going to talk about that as a genre, it's my favorite genre of music. Wikipedia claims you can draw a line from that to Supertramp or Queen. Queen, I don't know. I mean, they're actually a band that has next to zero Beach Boys influence, from what I can tell, even though I think they wound up in about the same place as a lot of people that were influenced by the Beach Boys. But I do think this was a very influential single in that way. You know, just it's taken so many different things and put them in a ball and being awesome. And for that reason, this is Adam's vote for the greatest Beach Boys single of all time. Next up in the queue, we have You Still Believe in Me. And this song, let's do the credits first. On grand piano for the intro only, we have Brian Wilson and Tony Asher. Brian plucking the strings of the piano with bobby pins, and Tony Asher holding down the foot pedals of same. On the body of the track, we have on 12-string electric lead guitars, Barney Kessel, possibly again with his Bellzouki contraption, and Glenn Campbell. Carol Kay on bass guitar, Lyle Ritz on upright bass, Al DeLore harpsichord, Steve Douglas on grand piano, interesting place for him, he's usually on sax, Hal Blaine on finger cymbals and bicycle horn, Julius Wechter, timpanis and bicycle bell, clarinet, Jim Horn and Plas Johnson, bass clarinets, Bill Green and Jay Migliori, and on vocals, it's Brian on lead vocal. 5 of the 6 Beach Boys are on this, Brian, Bruce, Al, Carl, and Mike. The experts that look into these things think that Dennis is not on it. I've had a close listen to the session tapes. I think he might be, but if so, he is faintly there, and it would be probably doing something similar to what Mike's already singing. There's a place where it feels like there's like a round effect where 2 people are coming on the same note in different places, and there's another place I think I might hear Dennis kind of way in the background, but I also might be hearing things. So Dennis might be on it, probably leaning towards not on it. So 5 or 6 Beach Boys on this one. So this song, as I have referred to, started out as In My Childhood, part of Brian's abandoned innocent childhood concept from 1965, the proto Pet Sounds idea. And there's a bit of a mystery about when this was cut. Now, the story has been for a long time that Brian cut a track for this in 65 at about the time he did a couple of other things in preparation for this album. And then Tony Asher comes in. Brian hates this track. So Brian, according to Tony's recollection, gives him a tape of the track with a piano part playing the melody over it, and Tony goes home, writes lyrics to it that become You Still Believe in Me. And that becomes the new track. They wipe part of what's on the old track and begin anew. So there's a problem with this, however, and it's kind of a mystery, and it was explained to me by Craig in some detail, and I'll try to explain it to you. Each of these recordings has a master number, and then on the tape box there's usually a session date, and then in addition there's the AFM, the American Federation of Musicians, union contract so the musicians get paid, and that usually has a date on it as well. And these are evidentiary items to determine a lot of the stuff that we talk about, who played what and when they happened. So the master number of this recording very clearly places it in an October 1965 time frame, which would make perfect sense because that's when Brian was doing the other stuff that sort of went into Pet Sounds. I think the song Pet Sounds was cut about that time, and a couple of other exploratory tracks that he didn't use. So that makes perfect sense, and that dovetails with Tony Asher's recollection because he was brought into the project in December 65, and so he presumably would have been working with an extant track then. But there's a problem with this because the tape box and the AFM documentation very clearly show this to be January 24th, the date of tracking of this song. Now this, for a long time, was explained as this was the tracking session for Brian and Tony doing their whole thing with the plucking the bobby pins inside the piano, and because that was obviously a different session from the main tracking. And in fact, hilariously, apparently there's like an outtake reel of just those guys trying to do this for hours. Because again, the intro is Brian plucking the interior of the piano, the strings actually underneath the cover. They lifted the cover and he's plucking the strings. And Tony is holding down the sustain pedal so the dampers inside the piano don't prevent the strings from resonating. So it would have taken a whole session, and it did, just to accomplish this experimental intro with Brian plucking the strings inside a piano to get, again, a new kind of different sound for his new album. However, it's recently been discovered that Carol Kaye's logbook very clearly shows the session for this being on January 24th. Well, there's no reason for Carol Kaye to be playing on the intro. She doesn't. It's all piano and vocals. So if Carol Kaye played on the track on January 24th, that means the main track was cut on January 24th, which also doesn't make any sense because that comes after Wouldn't It Be Nice, which Tony claims was the second song they worked on. I can't explain this. Craig and the team, they can't explain this. My gut instinct is the track was really cut somehow in October 65, and Carol Kaye's logbook is wrong. I don't know why that would be, though. Unless Carol Kaye did her logbook off the, I mean, I don't know. It does, any way you try to explain this, it doesn't make any sense. So it's one of these fun little mysteries we can obsess over, but this was the first or second song written and recorded for the album, and if it went down the way that the session documentation indicates, Asher's recollection, which has been quite consistent, is incorrect. But anyway, who knows? So anyway, going into the intro, this part, it's doubled on a second track. On a third track, the paper clips are actually added to the piano strings, so you get a different sound, and that makes sense, because when you're doubling and tripling things, you want a slight variation in the sound, or else you're not really adding very much. And then Brian and Marilyn sing the opening discount, and then there's a lower harmony that I guess Asher sang, and because the Beach Boys were still away at the point they did this intro. And it's a very demanding thing to sing, and I'll get into that in a minute when we analyze this section. But there's some cheat breaths if you listen to the isolated vocal tracks. Brian actually and Marilyn didn't completely do the whole vocal in one run. There's a little bit of taking a breath and starting in the middle there, and they kind of pushed it all together. But still a very impressive vocal thing to do. Great for vocal exercises. When I was on the road, it's something that I at some point made it a point to learn how to sing this part. And then when I was doing a lot of road work, excuse me, and I had to do shows every day, and I couldn't just hit the stage and hope I had all the notes because I was froggy from the night before. I can remember being on the road, and I'd be driving, and I would do the opening descant to "You Still Believe in Me," going up and down the scale. So I'd start, ooh, and ooh, and it was great because you're going through this. I think it's an octave or an octave and a half. I guess an octave. So you're going through a whole octave, doing that melody, and you're going through all your crossovers in your voice. It's great to find out what parts of your voice are trashed and what notes you've got and you don't have. And if, once I finally, and I would know where the top of my range was. So yeah, if you are a vocal type and you have to do a lot of singing, there's a pro tip. Use the intro to "You Still Believe in Me" as a vocal exercise. But more broadly speaking, the intro is just magnificent. The vibe of it is so ethereal, with the reverb meshing with the vocal and the hanging overtones of the piano. It's just really amazing. Now, stereo versus mono, doing that comparison, the intro kind of comes apart. Some of the discrete things in the mono mix of it are heard separately, and it's not as cool. So I think just for that alone, I prefer the mono version of this song. Speaking of the track more broadly, the keyboard parts, that sort of playground kind of thing going on, alternating with the droning clarinets, interacting with reverb. Again, I talked about the reverb over and over, interacting with whatever the primary instrumental backdrop that's holding the chords together. That's sort of what makes a lot of these tracks have their distinctive character. So the clarinet backdrop, a very interesting choice, having those sort of low clusters of clarinet and the sound they make with the reverb on them. That's a really interesting sound, and one of the many innovations Brian made arrangement-wise to give this a really unique character. Now, I said before, there's kind of two kinds of tracks. There's the tracks with pretty busy chord progressions, and then the bass line's going to be kind of drony, and then there's tracks with more sparse chord progressions, and the bass line's going to be kind of busy. This song's an exception. It's just kind of drony. It's not a super complicated chord progression, although there's some cool things about it. And the bass is pretty fundamental. It doesn't do a whole lot. But there's still some interesting things compositionally, and so let's take a quick look at that aspect of this song.
Now, You Still Believe in Me is a fairly simple song on the face of it. It's in the key of B. It's a 1-2-4 pattern. So you've got this. Then goes to E. So from the perspective of the bass line, those two root progressions are very similar. So it's like dum da 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 da. Then it's basically turning it around, dum ba da da bum ba da da, and that's an E. E, B, A. There may be some substitutions in there, but just for the purposes of what we're talking about, it's that simple. Because what's going to come next is pretty cray-cray. Because so we've got these two basically simplistic progressions that are related to one another. Every time we break up, you bring back your love to me. Okay, so now we're landing on a ringer chord, what musicians call a ringer chord, something that's a little unexpected, but not for Brian. This is still pretty straight up. We're winding up an A flat. So a half step down from where we were, then we go to the relative minor, the D flat, but then things get really wild. And after all I promised you so faithfully, you still, so we're in a B major chord now. Still believe in me. But what does the root do? Let's go back again. We were on A flat. And after all I promised you, we're on D flat, the bass doesn't move. Those two chords shouldn't work. So you've got a 2 in the bass. Remember we were talking about all these crazy roots? This is a crazy root. So it's a B with a C sharp in the bass. Still B. Then the bass descends a whole step just like the chord does, but we're still out of sync because we got a C sharp minor over a B chord. Then going down again, everything's still going out a whole step out of sync with the root and the chord. Now we got an A and we got a B chord and an A.
This is wrong. But I left the mistake in to make a point about how tricky this music can be and how even people with good ears listening carefully can get things wrong the first try. The bass here actually goes to A flat instead of A to form an A flat minor 7 with a B triad on top. I heard this originally as an A, that is a B dominant 7 with a 7 in the bass, because the overtones on the acoustic bass on the original track made it sound sharp. When I went back over the episode for accuracy, as one should do, I did catch the mistake, but I was only sure after listening to several different versions, including Brian's At My Piano album and his performance from Pet Sounds Live, that I had the root correct on the second try. But what was more interesting to me was checking myself on the internet was completely useless because all of the chord charts I could find were totally wrong. They either had the root correct but had the upper triad wrong, or they showed the root as being F sharp, which indicated indicates the transcribers likely were following the prominent bass clarinet line instead of the bass guitar. This is a great example of how difficult this music is to correctly and accurately transcribe, and why, when it comes to the Beach Boys, it's always a good idea to stay a little humble and be open to correction, because once in a while we all get something wrong.
Then finally landing on a G6, which is a fairly unorthodox move, but still relative to what we just heard, it's pretty straight up. So you've got, so you stupid, believe in me. And once again, checking on our Brian Ness here. If you want to be in a Beach Boys tribute band and you want to play the song, this is what you got to do.
So getting back to the lyrics of the song, it's interesting to reflect on how this started out as a song about childhood, and then we wind up in sort of the next step in the theme of the album, where before you have an adolescent sort of in the flush of new love, wishing to deepen the relationship, and now the relationship's being deepened, and one of the people in the relationship, the narrator, discovers that he is failing his side of the relationship, and his partner's doing a lot of the heavy emotional lifting, is being more patient. This kind of goes back to some of the themes of Beach Boys Today we talked about, where Brian is trying to make the transition to young adulthood from adolescence. And now in Pet Sounds, as I've said before, we start to see Brian kind of going, I don't know if I can. And this is a song that mines that territory, and it's widely thought to be a paean to his wife Marilyn and her endless patience with him as he's going through all the things he's going through in 65 and 66 and exploring in all the various ways. And she's very patient indeed, because the song before this is a paean to how much Brian wants to get with her sister. So it's kind of interesting to have this 1-2 punch of a song about Diane, and now we're bringing it back to sort of asking your partner for forgiveness and acknowledging her contribution to the relationship and the patience and the outsized amount of effort she's having to put in to maintain it. Just one more aspect about the instrumental track: the bicycle bell is locked in with the whole childhood concept, and Brian didn't like it, but he's kind of stuck with it from the earlier iteration of the song, and it does kind of seem a little weird. But it's just one of those things that, it's a random sound in Pet Sounds, and it's got a lot of random sounds, so it's kind of cool. So looking ahead to people that covered it, the biggest and best known cover of this, to the extent there are any, it was by Kirsty MacColl. She did a single of it in 1981, a very interesting one. It wasn't successful, but she did a pretty interesting harmony arrangement for that, and some inventive new chord changes she added to it. So it's a little early 80s-y, but the Kirsty MacColl version of this is well worth seeking out. Paul McCartney singled the song out as his favorite on the album. And a lot of people don't realize saying this is Matthew Sweet. And I have a story about this because I said before that I was involved in 2 stagings of this album, about 15 years apart, and maybe 20, I guess. And the first one was in 1996 in Los Angeles, and I believe it was under the Wild Honey umbrella. Wild Honey is a musical and charitable organization in Los Angeles that for many, many years has done amazing work, mounting concerts, involving a lot of my friends, and doing pretty elaborate stagings of classic and well thought of work, including the Beach Boys. And I've only been involved with them a couple times, but this was one of them. And so there was a choir of about, I think, 10 people, and I was one of them, singing some of the lower mid-range parts. And then there was a whole other band, a very accomplished one, that was doing instrumental tracks. And I remember DJ Bonebreak from X was the drummer, and that was where I met him. And, just a lot of other really high-level guys, from LA. So I was, kind of at the bottom rung of that, being in the choir. But Matthew Sweet was one of the guest singers at this show, because each song had its own singer, and there usually were somewhat named people, at least relative to our little music scene. And so Matthew Sweet pulled this song. And so I don't remember if it was after a rehearsal, like a dress rehearsal, or before the show. I remember it was at the actual place that we did the show. But I was backstage by myself, and I noticed Matthew Sweet was also backstage in a different corner of the backstage, and he was kind of pacing around looking a little nervous. And, I finally went up to him and said, "Hey, Matt, are you okay?" And he's like, "Yeah, well, I'm kind of nervous because I got to sing You Still Believe in Me. And I'm worried about that I'm not going to be able to get through the first part, the intro, right? Because it's a pretty tricky part." So at that point, I guess I was able to do it kind of, and I said to him, "Well, I'm in the backup choir. Do you want me to double you, and I'll sing it with you?" And he's like, Would you do that?" I'm like, "Sure, Matthew Sweet, I got your back." I was like, "I got it," right? So I'm feeling pretty pleased with myself. I'm 29, like, all cocky, So, so what happened was, so we get on stage and we've done, whatever, we're on the second song, right? And I don't remember if it was the count in or if, I think maybe the orchestra actually played through the part once or twice before the vocals came in. I think they might have rearranged it. I don't remember how this went down, but they started it very slow. Okay, so it's one thing to go COVID voice disclaimer, ooh, and so on, right, but it's quite another thing to go ooh, so it's just way too slow, and I'm trying so hard to keep him up, but I can't do it either. So we because it's just so slow, it's just not enough breath. You need Pavarotti to do it, right? So about 3/4 of the way in, both Matthew Sweet and I just collapse in a heap. That we're out of breath. It was humiliating. So anyway, that was my massive fail trying to support Matthew Sweet singing this song, who I'm a big fan of, by the way. So, so You Still Believe in Me, another great song, another rather challenging song vocally, but another building block in this incredible album. Okay, third song is That's Not Me, and this is a very significant song on the record because for many years it was thought that the Beach Boys did not play on Pet Sounds at all. But it's actually not true. This track is the only one that they did participate in. All of the band was apparently present for the session. Everybody but Mike is on the AFM contracts, although it appears that only Brian, Carl, and Dennis actually recorded, with a possible exception of some clapping. Bruce seems to have been, there seems to have been this arrangement where when Brian was recording, he would sort of produce from inside the studio, and then Bruce would sort of produce from the booth. So Bruce would kind of understudy Brian. I think Carl might have done this a few times as well, because you can't be in two places at once, right? You're in the control room listening, or you're in the main room performing. So it would be useful for Brian, if he's having to track something, to have someone he trusts, with ears he trusts, in the room making sure it's going to tape. Okay, and since Bruce had long experience as a producer, this is a really logical thing to do. So the credits here are quite interesting. I'm going to go down them here. Brian plays Hammond organ and bass, and there's a couple different bass parts here. Carl plays lead guitar, and he plays both 6-string and he overdubs a 12-string. Dennis is on drums. Terry Melcher's on tambourine. And then this is one of my very, very minor contributions to this stuff. I noticed that there actually was another instrument that I believe is a cabasa, which is a shaker with sort of chains on it. You kind of go like this. And this had been overlooked. So I actually pointed this out to Craig and the crew, and they verified that this was indeed the case. My guess is it was Steve Korthoff who was present and who frequently did percussion duty on the Beach Boys track. So in some way, because this just happened, I literally just figured this out and and told them last night. I don't actually know what the answer is, but by the time this video goes up, I might know, so I'll put up there. Also, there's a thing that sounds like a wood block, and I always assumed it was a wood block, but I was told, and actually when I listened carefully, I realized it was. It's actually people clapping their hands and it being run through a Leslie speaker. It's really interesting. So that wood block, that sound, that's hand claps going through a Leslie speaker, which again is the rotating speaker that's customarily used for an organ. There were apparently 4 people clapping. It was 4 of these people: Brian, Dennis, Carl, Terry, Bruce, Al, and Steve. My guess would be it's probably Brian, Carl, Dennis, and Terry, but I actually don't have any idea. So who knows? Al was on the contract, but does not apparently seem to have played on it. He's not heard of the session tapes. There's not anything for him to really have done, but maybe he was one of the clappers along with Bruce. It's just hard to say. But anyway, Brian, Carl, and Dennis at least are certainly on That's Not Me. And a very special aspect of this track is I now have access to the original Pet Sounds multitrack of the song. And I'm going to play you each instrumental part and we'll look at them in depth. Okay, actually, I don't have the multitracks from Pet Sounds, and actually they wouldn't do what I said they would do anyway because the way they were overdubbed and what, forget it. Anyway. But what I do have is, as I mentioned in one of the prior episodes, during my time as a producer having a small studio in Los Angeles, I got a project where I was asked to recreate That's Not Me, basically redo the track as faithfully as I could to the original, and they were going to have another singer do Brian's part. And this was for a band called Summer Children. They did an album that I produced, and actually I'm still working on some stuff with them. And I think they may even be using this for something. But anyway, I haven't opened this track for quite a while. So I'm kind of curious to see how it holds up and what's there. So you'll watch it with me. And we'll just see. I remember it, it was a little bit of a daunting thing to try to do. Go recreate a Pet Sounds track. But I think it came out pretty okay. And in going through how I was able to recreate the various elements, we can talk about what's there, and also I can show you some of the things I did to kind of get that happening. So here we go. So I see that I haven't opened this since 2016. My goodness. All right, here we go. It looks like I had 2 versions of the original up in the file, one of which was the backing track and the other of which is the actual master take, and I went off of that. Let's just quick solo that track. All right, so there's the track. So let's see if I just play the track, what we got here.
I had to prove that I could make it alone now, but that's not me.
Obviously not Brian singing.
My folks, when I wrote and told them what I was up to, said that's not me. I went through all kinds of changes.
Okay, so let's, that was, not terrible. Let's look at the elements here that went into this. Let's get rid of the vocals. Obviously, the lead vocals don't really concern us. So we have the organ, which is right here. So that's the first building block. And so it's basically block chords on the organ. And as I said, interacting with the reverb is what gives the track its sound. Let's see what we got here. 6-string. And so there's Carl's guitar. Then there's the tambourine. So that's kind of the basis of that. And then it looks like I had, and then I did have 2 basses, I believe. Here, so here's the Dan Electro bass. So to go over the, what do we got here? So
So as you can see, there's two bass parts, because here's the other bass, right? Let me start that again, and I'm going to turn the bass up so you can hear it a little bit better, how the two bass guitars interact with each other, because that's really cool. And again, I just did what I thought was on the record, so this is pretty close to what you would hear if you could do this on Pet Sounds. So this is the second verse. So what's really cool there is you have like basically two sort of lead bass lines going at it with each other. So that's kind of slick. And then with the percussion, let's see what we got here. Let's see what I did. So we got this. Okay. Did I actually do claps? Did I figure that out? I think I did. Okay, so that woodblocky sound I did, I don't know exactly what this is, but it does look like one of them was a clap. Yeah. Okay, so I didn't know it was clapping on the original, but I guess I got that right and did the clapping. So good for me. And then we got these other tambourine parts here. It looks like we got two. So let's see what we got here. Here's the part that the other guys think is a second tambourine, and I did obviously then. So again, you can hear how the, and then let's put in the drums. We've got a couple of toms here. Again, this is the second verse here. So that's pretty slick. And let's put the bass back in so you can kind of hear what's going on there. Leakage. What is this? Oh, I wonder if I must have taped the room to kind of get the sound of, because you know you had a lot of mic bleed in the original studios because you had all these musicians right on top of each other, so I may have deliberately put some in. Yeah. So I think what I did is fed a mix back through a speaker or something and then recorded that to give the impression like we're recording it all live in a studio. So that was clever of me. Okay, neat. All right, so there's that. And then let's see, we got some 12-string guitar here. Sure. Okay. And then we got vocals, right? Let's see what's here. We've got a lot of vocals. See if I got a group for these. Vocals 1, vocals 2. Didn't help me at all. Let's see. Okay. I gotta do all of them. Come on, Adam. So I don't know anything about what's on these vocals. They're probably all me. But let's just find out what's there. And I'll put in the reverb just so it's not too nasty. Okay, so let's see what we got here. Got a guitar in there. I love that bum. I'm doing my patented flat Brian imitation. Okay, you know, so that's cool. So all together, this is what we got. Let's go to the ending here. So you know, it isn't Brian, but it's not bad. So let's. I want to show you before we close this file. Because what I remember doing, here we have the master thing, to get this sound, when I was comparing to what was originally there, I had to put an enormous amount of reverb on it. So you can see this is the master bus here. And here's, hello, come on. Yes. So here's the reverb I used. This is the same reverb I used on David Marks's album. It's if I remember correctly, it's got a pretty natural sound. That was like the biggest thing I had to worry about on David's record because the band was great. It was just, I had to make the drums wetter because they sounded too modern, but I didn't want to put, like, I had to use digital reverb, but I didn't want it to sound like digital reverb. So I used something along these lines. But you can see this is on the master, right? This isn't on the individual tracks. And there's a ton of reverb on the master. It's 29% reverb. So listen to the difference. I'm going to take it out. See, it's nice and clean. Now it sounds brighter, you know. And also with the yeah, this is a flaw with my Pro Tools setup. But I also put in quite a bit of top and then a good bit of compression. Take the compression out. Hear how flat it sounds without it. Now I'll put it back in. So it's that interaction of the reverb and the compression and sort of the low frequencies. Like if I critique this now, I think I did a pretty good job, but the one place I didn't get right is there's not enough bottom end on this because the whole Pet Sounds vibe, let's listen to the original again. Hear how kind of murky it sounds? And it's that low mid-range sound going with that sort of saturation of the tape and that's what makes it hit so hard. And the one that I did, I think it's pretty good, but it's a little bit thin. Could have had a little more of that going on. But hey, you know, there's Pet Sounds and that's what I did. That's not me, by the way. Anyway, that's my close-up of That's Not Me, my little recreation of it. Anyway, so that's what I did. It's pretty close to what was there.
One more aspect to the musician credits here. Carol Kay, who has a tendency to do things like this, has claimed that she and Glenn Campbell both played on it, overdubbing bass and guitar, respectively. The session documentation and the audio evidence of the track, while it does confirm that those instruments were recorded, the quality of the performance and other things suggest it was Carl and Brian and not Carol and Glenn. They certainly did this role on other songs on this album. I think the next one, actually. She probably was simply misremembering which Pet Sound session that occurred on. Certainly very understandable. No poor reflection on Carol. We know that Terry Melcher played the tambourine, not just because he's heard on the session tapes, but there's a great story about Bruce Johnston and Terry Melcher, who, remember, were partners prior to the Beach Boys situation. And Terry was listening to Pet Sounds and talking about what great a track That's Not Me was, but ragging on how bad the tambourine playing. And Bruce started cracking up and said, "That's you. You did that." Because Bruce had a very clear memory of Terry playing tambourine on this. So that's a kind of funny thing on this. All 6 Beach Boys are on the backups. Brian and Mike are on the lead vocals. Tony Asher claims he contributed a bit to the melody. As I've said, this is a minor controversy on the sidelines. Brian claims sole credit for all the music. It seems reasonable to give Asher the benefit of the doubt here. Brian does have, we love him, but he does have a history of not remembering some of the ancillary contributions people make to the music. This is understandable. If you're focused on the music and you're the primary creator, you can sometimes forget the people that helped you. I've done this myself. You know, it just happens. So I think we can say Asher probably did a little bit of the melodic work on this. Stereo versus mono, to me, mono kills the stereo version. It just coheres way better. Lyrically, Beach Boys biographer Timothy White has suggested the song is about Brian's feelings of withdrawal from the touring band. Brian, certainly in more vague terms, has said this is a song that personally expresses who he is. And it's interesting when you think about its the question it raises of ambition versus just being happy with the simplicity of the relationships in your life and being true to who you are. And considering that this is such an ambitious recording of Brian's, it's an interesting statement for him to make, but at the same time, we know that in just a year's time, Brian is indeed going to decide, this isn't me, being this, Mondo producer, artist guy. I'm just going to go back to being, just me, whoever that is. So it's both interesting in the context of Pet Sounds and the narrative that it has, and of discovering things about growing up that maybe you don't like so much, and also about what Brian's progression is about to be. It's a little bit of foreshadowing to the withdrawal Brian will undergo when he withdraws from the band. But it's interesting to note that That's Not Me is cut by the band in a little more minimal style than the other tracks, but it fits right in with the rest of the album. Again, the organ this time is cohering with the reverb to give it the sonic palette, if you will. And it's that almost ghostly sense of, here's a non-traditional, somewhat, I mean, it's still an organ, but it's not like a guitar or a bass or whatever. A non-traditional rock instrument with the reverb kind of providing the scene, if you will, for the song. And that's what we get with Pet Sounds, and that's one of the reasons this track fits in so very well. And it's a very powerful song. And it's a very powerful album, and we've been talking about it and analyzing it for quite a while now. So let's take a break now. Let me get my voice back, and I'll be back with part 5 when we'll get to the back end of side 1, and we'll continue our deep dive and exploration into Pet Sounds.